Chapter 5. Admission. The story spoken. Step 5. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. The pages from Chapter 4 are sitting somewhere in your house right now, and they are radioactive. You know exactly where they are. You have thought about where they are while doing other things. Perhaps you have already imagined the fire, or the shredder, or the long quiet decades of a locked drawer, because everything in you that built the old regime is voting, loudly, for one of those three exits, and the vote comes wrapped in reasonable clothing. This is private. This is nobody's business. I've faced it. Isn't facing it the point? Surely God and I can handle it from here. The program's answer, delivered with the terrible gentleness of people who tried every exit first, is no. The pages must be spoken, out loud, to God, to yourself, and to another living, breathing, listening human being. And until they are, the fourth step is a letter never sent. The rooms compress the reason into 6 words that have kept more people alive than most medicines. You're only as sick as your secrets. This chapter is about why those 6 words are not a slogan but a diagnosis, why the speaking does something the writing could not, why the step names 3 listeners and what each one is for, and why the person across the kitchen table, holding their coffee and your history, is, whether either of you knows it, standing in for someone else. Begin with the load-bearing wall. Every addiction, every false self, which Chapter 1 argued is the same structure wearing street clothes, runs on secrecy the way a fire runs on oxygen. This is not incidental, it is architectural. The counterfeit self cannot survive being fully seen, because it is made of claims that collapse on inspection, and so, with the cunning of anything fighting for its life, it builds the dark it needs. The hidden bottle is only the crudest room in a much larger hidden house. The unmentioned years, the edited history, the person your coworkers know who would not recognize the person your bathroom mirror knows, the whole second set of books. And here is the mechanism that makes secrecy lethal rather than merely lonely. Shame compounds in the dark. A fact about your past, kept where no eye can reach it, does not sit inert like a stone in a drawer. It grows. Unwitnessed. It is free to mean anything. And shame, which is the false self's in-house storyteller, will make it mean everything. Not I did a terrible thing but I am a terrible thing. Not an event in the weave but the name of the weaver. You have been alone in a room with your worst facts for years, and in that room, with no other witness to contest it, shame has been the only judge, jury, and historian. The 5th step is, before it is anything else, a change of venue. Be careful, though, to draw one line exactly where the tradition draws it, because the enemies of this step love to blur it. Secrecy is not privacy. Privacy is a garden wall, a healthy boundary around what is yours, disclosed freely, to whom you choose, when you choose. Secrecy is a hostage situation. Concealment required, on pain of the regime's collapse, policed from inside by dread. The test between them is simple and infallible. Privacy is peaceful, secrecy has a pulse. What you keep in privacy, you could speak without the room tilting. What you keep in secrecy keeps you. It taxes your attention, patrols your conversations, and charges rent every single day in the currency of vigilance. Step 5 does not bulldoze the garden wall. You will not be asked to live disclosed to all people at all times, and the choosing of your one listener, we will come to it, as itself an exercise of healthy privacy. Step 5 ends the hostage situation. Only the secrets are summoned. But all of them are. Now, why must ink become voice? You externalized already. Chapter 4 made much of it. The self that cannot see itself, handed at last a paper mirror. Why isn't the mirror enough? Because, Percy again, one step deeper, the self does not only need a sign of itself. It needs a hearer. News, Percy loved to insist, is not news until it is told. A message in a bottle is not yet a communication while it bobs in the sea. The castaway's sentences complete themselves only on the day someone on some far shore reads them. Language, on the triadic account this book has trusted from its prologue, is not a private filing system that occasionally goes public. It is communion technology, built for the space between persons, and a word only does its full work when it crosses that space and lands. You have perhaps already discovered the difference in miniature. A sentence that sat tame on your page for a week, "I haven't spoken to my daughter in 6 years," becomes, the moment your own voice carries it across a real room into a real face, an event. Your throat knows before your mind does that something is happening now which the notebook never made happen. The written inventory made your history visible. Only the spoken admission makes it real between persons, moves it from the private ledger to the common world, where, it turns out, everything that heals us has always lived. The rooms have a saying for what the notebook cannot do and the kitchen table can. We are only as sick as our secrets, and a secret read silently to oneself is still, in every way that matters, being kept. The step names 3 listeners, in a deliberate order, and each admission does work the others cannot. Take them one at a time, slowly, because each one dismantles a different wing of the hidden house. Admitted to God. Start with the obvious objection, because it is standing in the doorway. He already knows. Every line of your inventory, every room of the hidden house, every fact you have guarded with years of vigilance, known, completely, from before you did it. So what could the admission possibly add? And the answer is nothing, which is exactly the point. You are not filing a report. The file was never incomplete. What changes in the admission is not God's knowledge but your address. For years you have carried these facts away from Him, held them at the angle of concealment, lived toward God when you lived toward Him at all, as a man lives toward a creditor, face arranged, books cooked. The admission turns you around. It takes what was carried away and carries it toward, and the turning, not the information, is the event. This book gave you the grammar for it in chapter 3. God receives without acquiring. Your admission adds nothing to Him. No data, no leverage, no completion of a divine file. And it is genuinely received, taken in, felt, met, mattering, the way a father receives the confession of a child who told him nothing he had not watched happen. Which is, of course, precisely the scene the gospel gives us, and it repays a careful look. The prodigal son, in the far country, composes his 5th step among the pigs, rehearses it, Luke says, word for word. Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants. He walks home rehearsing. And when he arrives, the father, who has been watching the road, runs, and falls on his neck, and kisses him before one word of the speech is out. The son begins his admission anyway. He gets through the sin and the unworthiness, and the father, who has heard enough, talks over the ending. The boy never reaches the line about the hired servants, because the father is already calling for the robe. Mark every clause of that sequence, because it is the whole theology of admission to God. The confession was composed in the far country but received at the embrace. It was genuinely necessary, the turning was real, the walk was real, the words were owed and offered, and it was never, for one instant, the price of the embrace, which outran it down the road. You will say your worst facts to God, and you must. And you will be saying them from inside arms that closed before you cleared your throat. Admitted to ourselves. This one hides in the middle of the step like a hinge, and people miss it because it sounds redundant. Surely the inventory was the admission to ourselves. It was not, quite, and the difference is worth a paragraph. It is entirely possible. Every sponsor has watched it. To write a technically accurate inventory in the third person of the soul. The facts listed, the columns filled, and the author still standing slightly to one side of the page, a careful biographer of someone he declines to fully be. The admission to yourself is the collapse of that last distance. It happens, usually, in the speaking, often midway through the fifth step itself, at some unremarkable line, when your own voice reaches your own ears carrying your own history and something in you, hearing it said aloud in the first person, finally files it under mine. Not mine as shame files it, the name of the weaver, but mine as an heir accepts an estate. These debts, these fields, this actual life, and no other, is the one I am now sober in. The tradition's word for the moment is compunction. The puncture, and it is famously double-edged. The same instant that finally lets the grief all the way in is the instant that finally lets the mercy all the way in, because both had been waiting outside the same sealed door. You cannot be forgiven at a distance from yourself. The admission to yourself is the closing of the distance. And to another human being. Here is the crux, the clause people circle for months, the reason this step has a reputation. Everything in the modern spiritual temperament objects. Surely the vertical transaction suffices. Surely God and me is the whole of religion. What possible work is left for a witness with a coffee cup? The whole weight of the tradition answers back, and it is worth hearing how many independent voices say the same thing. The Apostle James, in the Church's first generation, gives the instruction flat. Confess your sins to one another, and pray for one another, that you may be healed. Healing. Note, attached to the horizontal admission. The Desert Fathers and Mothers, the first great psychologists of the hidden house, made the manifestation of thoughts to an elder the non-negotiable center of their whole therapy. Not because the elder absolved, but because they had learned, in the laboratory of the cells, that a temptation disclosed loses its teeth, and that the monk who kept his own counsel was already in the serpent's mouth. The Celtic Church carried the same discovery north in the institution of the Anamchara, the soul friend, and gave it the proverb this book would carve over the door of every meeting. A person without a soul friend is like a body without a head. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer, writing for Protestants suspicious of confessionals, put the mechanism in a single devastating sentence. The one who is alone with his sin is utterly alone. Surrounded, perhaps, by fellowship, by church, by family, and alone, because all of them are in fellowship with his performance, and none of them with him. That is the loneliness you have actually been living in, and notice that it is loneliness of a very particular shape. It is possible to be loved lavishly and remain wholly unconsoled by it, because some sealed room in you knows the love was won by the edited version, that the people cherishing you have never met the applicant. Unwitnessed, you are unloved at the point of the wound, no matter how loved you are everywhere else. The fifth step is the only known repair for this, and its mechanism is brutally simple. You let one human being meet the unedited applicant, the whole file, the worst rooms, and then you sit in the unbearable 10 seconds after the last sentence, and the person across the table does not leave. Does not flinch, mostly. Refills the coffee, mostly. Says, as often as not, some version of the sentence that has ended 1,000 hostage situations. Me too. Or its longer form, thank you for trusting me with that. And in that moment something happens that no vertical transaction alone could accomplish, precisely because the lie you believed was horizontal. Shame's whole case, remember, was that full knowledge and love cannot coexist in the same room, that to be truly known is to be finally left. The claim was empirical. It required an experiment. The experiment has now been run, with you as the subject and the worst facts on the table, and love did not leave the room. Shame does not survive controlled conditions. It never has. No living teacher has stood closer to the center of this step than James Finley, and it is time to say why his voice has haunted this book since its prologue. Finley's authority on the healing power of telling is not academic. The novice who sat at Merton's feet at Gethsemane carried out of that monastery not only the true self teaching this book built its second chapter on, but a wound of his own. He was abused there, by a man he had trusted with his soul. And he has told that story publicly, deliberately, in his own books and talks. The disclosure itself offered as medicine for every listener still locked in a sealed room with something that was done to them. Hold the shape of that fact. The man who teaches a generation that the love of God protects us from nothing but sustains us in all things is not reciting a comfort. He is reporting a finding, from the far side of his own fifth step, one that took years, and witnesses, and the slow discovery that the telling does not merely relieve the teller but re-narrates the told. What sat in the dark as annihilating verdict becomes, spoken into safe and loving witness, a history, grievous, real, and survivable, a thing that happened rather than the name of what one is. And from the therapist's chair where he spent 30 years receiving other people's worst wounds, Finley distilled the axiom that explains the strange grace every fifth step listener reports. What is most personal is most universal. The facts you are most certain exile you from the human family, the specific shames, the unrepeatable disgraces, are, in their depths, the most common human property there is. Which is why the meeting nods at the unspeakable, and why your sponsor, hearing your unprecedented confession, keeps almost smiling. Not at you, but at the 20th arrival of the secret everyone brings believing themselves its only carrier. You are not the exception to the human condition. You are the human condition, finally reporting for fellowship. A fence here, and this book plants it with Finley's own care, because the reader who most needs this chapter is often the reader most endangered by a clumsy version of it. If your inventory's heaviest pages concern not what you did but what was done to you, then here 3 protections before you schedule anything. First, the fifth step is not a trauma disclosure obligation. The step concerns the exact nature of our wrongs. Your side of the ledger. What was done to you may enter the telling exactly as far as serves your freedom and not 1 inch farther, and wounds do not owe anyone an audience. Second, the listener must be chosen, and chosen well. This is the privacy right exercised, not violated. The room's collective wisdom and the trauma clinicians agree with unusual unanimity. Someone steady, sworn to confidence, unentangled in your history, not the spouse. Usually. Never the person in the resentment column, experienced enough not to flinch and humble enough not to fix. A sponsor of long sobriety, a priest or pastor who knows the confessional's gravity, a director, a therapist, and for the wounds themselves, sometimes a professional first, so that the sacred telling is not asked to do clinical work. Third, safety is not cowardice. A telling that re-traumatizes is not a fifth step, it is a reenactment. The God who receives without acquiring is in no hurry that costs you your footing. The step waited years for you, it can wait for the right room. Those who use the sacrament of reconciliation will find the fifth step and the confessional embrace each other naturally, and many in the rooms have made one appointment serve both, with a priest who understood he was hearing history as well as sin. This book, whose author's church has heard confessions for 20 centuries, commends the doubling to anyone drawn to it, and insists on it for no one. A word now about the step's most precise phrase, which everyone quotes and almost no one notices, the exact nature of our wrongs. Not the exact list. The list was Chapter 4's business, the exact nature. The fifth step is not the fourth step read aloud, it is the fourth step understood aloud. Somewhere in the telling, and listeners report that they can hear the moment arrive, the inventory stops being an itemization and becomes a diagnosis. The 40 resentments resolve into the 3 fears that generated them. The scattered harms line up and show their single engine. And the teller, often mid-sentence, goes quiet, because he has just watched his own weave from above for the first time and seen the pattern in it. And the pattern, this book told you in chapter 1 where this was heading. As always, at bottom, a worship pattern. The exact nature of our wrongs is idolatry with the serial numbers restored. This particular good thing, asked to be God. This specific throne, built in the specific ruins of that specific fear. The beauty of your need, nailed, May's word, to this named and dated tree. Naming the God you actually served is the fifth step's deepest work, and it is work that nearly requires the witness. Patterns are precisely what the bent flashlight of chapter 4 cannot see solo, and half the sponsor's craft is the gentle question, do you hear what keeps coming up? That hands a man the aerial view of his own life. And beneath all of it, one disclosure from this book's deep architecture, stated here in the plainest words available, because step 5 is where it stops being doctrine and becomes experience. Chapter 2 told you that the you within is held in the Son. Here is the rest of what was given with you. You were never built solitary. The image of God in you is the image of a God who is Himself, from all eternity, a communion. Father, Son, Spirit, the feast before all worlds. And so the deepest you does not merely have a capacity for fellowship that circumstances may or may not fill. Communion is written into the original as your face. Membership came with the gift. Which means the isolation you have been living in. The sealed rooms, the edited self, the loneliness that lavish love could not touch, was never your nature and never your truth. It was the mask over your truth, the parasite's dark, the hostage situation and nothing more. And it means the fifth step is not the frightening construction of a bridge to another person across the void of your natural separateness. There is no void and there was no separateness. There is only a door, sealed from inside, and the telling is the unsealing. When the person across the table receives your history and does not leave, you are not achieving connection against the odds. You are coming home to a communion older than your exile, enacting outwardly, at one kitchen table, the fellowship you were given inwardly before the foundations. The meeting knew this before you did. Why do you think they kept saying welcome home to a stranger? Those who have done it describe the hours afterward in oddly physical terms. Lighter, scrubbed, hollowed out in the good way, taller, as if secrecy had a literal weight, which, as vigilance, it did. Savor that. It is real, and it was bought honestly. But something subtler has also happened, and it will matter for the rest of this book, so mark it before moving on. Somewhere in the telling, your relation to your own story changed. The facts did not change. This book will never tell you the facts change, but the story stopped being the sealed verdict it was in the dark and became something you can stand beside. Witnessed now, shared now, held in more hands than yours. You have had, whether you noticed or not, your first small taste of a mystery this book will open fully at its 8th chapter. That history is not finished, meaning what it meant, that the worst chapters can be reread from farther down the road, and that someone was in the rooms of your story whom you could not, at the time, see. The disciples on the Emmaus road told the stranger the whole of it. The hopes, the catastrophe, the sealed tomb, and only after the telling did the rereading begin, and only after the rereading did they recognize who had been listening. You have told the story now. The listener has it. What he does with received things, the remaining chapters will show. But first, the telling has left everything on the table in the light. The patterns named, the gods identified, the exact nature exact at last. And a strange new question is forming, one that surprises people with its difficulty. Now that you can see the machinery, the defects, diagnosed and nail it, do you actually want them gone? Do not answer quickly. Whole lives have been built around those defects. They were load bearing. Some of them still feel like friends, or armor, or the only parts of you with any color. The program, wise as ever about the human heart, does not rush from diagnosis to surgery. It inserts a step whose entire content is becoming willing, and that step, with the purgation it prepares, is where this book goes next.